What's the most important thing you have ever overslept? Story 1. I once as a child had to take sleeping pills cause of some medical disorder which wouldn't let me fall asleep. My mom woke me up because I forgot to take the pills. Story 2. The final for my justice course. I woke up with about 10 minutes left to the exam period. Fortunately for me, something had happened at my home about 30 minutes away which caused my mother to call the cops. I was able to use this as an excuse and hurry from home to the exam, and they then let me take it the next day. Story 3. A close friend's funeral. I knew when and where it was, had my alarm set and had my clothes picked out, but worked late the night before and had trouble dozing off, so I popped a few Tylenol PM and went out like a light. Next thing I know I wake up and it's way past the funeral. I still feel terrible about it to this day. Story 4. Obligatory. Not me. Good friend slept through a final exam. Still ended up passing the class though. 71, 2 IRC. He got super high the night before, set his alarm for 8 a.m. read turned on set microwave for 8 minutes, and went to sleep. Surprisingly smart sober person, daft as a pile of bricks otherwise. Story 5. OM late for the bus. Grabs toast and puts in mouth. Intro plays Mother's Day. I had all these things planned, went to sleep, woke up 17 hours later to a family member knocking on my front door to check up on me. My phone had died and no one was home to wake me up. No idea why I had slept that long. I didn't even stay up late. Only happened once, so freaky. Story 6. Law school exam. First semester. In law school, your entire grade for most classes is only the final exam. I have a particularly bad habit of not studying all semester and pulling all-nighters the day or two before exams to cram a semester's worth of material into my head. On the morning of one of my finals my first year, I woke to a text from a classmate asking where I was as the exam started in 15 minutes. Panicked, I raced to the administrative office because you get cards with a series of numbers to use as your name on exams, to ensure all exams are anonymously graded, and naturally, I hadn't gotten my card yet. However, the nitwit woman at the office wouldn't give me my anonymous card, stating that I had an unpaid parking ticket that first needed to be paid. I hadn't brought my wallet with me, but had brought my license which I offered to leave as collateral, promising to pay it once the exam was over. She rolled her eyes and told me tough luck, should have planned better, already in a panic, stressed about exams, not ready to accept I had caused this entire problem myself, and disbelieving that I was going to miss an exam due to this woman's lack of basic empathy. I lost it. She gave me my card. I was banned from entering the office unless 2 people were on staff though. Story 7. A flight from Amsterdam to home. That was a very costly nap, almost cost me more than the night before my flight. LPT. Don't party your off in Amsterdam the night before morning flight. Don't book morning flights out of Amsterdam. Story 8. My final. It started at noon. I woke up and checked the time. It was 2. I was super pissed at myself, so I got out of bed and punched something. That something was my dorm room window. It shattered and made a pretty nasty laceration in my arm. I went to the ER, stitched it up and asked the DR for a note stating I was there that day. Got the note, showed it to my prof. The laceration. He gave me a B, not bad. Story 9. My sociolinguistics final. I had an alarm go off at 8 a.m. Monday through Friday, but this final was at 9 a.m. on a Saturday, because my school was run by, so no alarm. I started day drinking pretty much immediately. I had done very well in the class, so I ended up with a C despite having a 0 on the final, but I still feel really embarrassed about the whole thing. Meh, my GPA was anyway. Fell asleep on a train in South Korea traveling from Seoul to Kumi City, normally a 3-hour trip. Thankfully, I woke up as the train was leaving the station, as I would never known that I passed my stop. I thought I'll just get off at the next stop and jump on the train traveling in the opposite direction. 45 minutes later I get off at a station that looks like a warehouse and is stationed in a valley. Think middle of nowhere, and you're close. Tracks are exiting the station in 12 directions. There's only one employee there and he can't speak English. The train schedule is printed on the wall and it is all in Korean. Story 10. I overslept and missed one of my closest friends' graduation. He was okay with that, until I oversleep and miss his 60th birthday party. Now he thinks I don't care about him, although I'm just a lazy. Story 11. I slept through the presentation for my dissertation at uni. It was worth 30 of the grade for that module with a pass mark of 60, so I felt pretty nervous. Turns out my report was pretty well received, so I got me 66 from that alone. Story 12. Senior year high school. Pulled an all-nighter editing together my final project for film. Class friend and I wrote and shot a movie. Finished just in time to get to school that morning to turn in the project and take the final exam. Went home and fell asleep, right through the spring musical. As a part of chorus that was a big part of our grade I believe, and all my family was there, I was blissfully asleep until my mom got home wondering where I had been. Story 13. Slept until 9 a.m. before a 9:30 a.m. state exam. Thought exam was at 2 p.m. Was just sitting down to breakfast when my mother checked the timetable. Left house at 9:20 a.m. to get to school 20 minutes away. Made it before the door closed thanks to my mother's careful driving. My dean sent in a cup of tea and biscuits for me during the exam, to keep me going. Scored 95. Story 14. Being born. According to my parents, my mom was in labor for hours with me and I just wasn't coming out at all. When I did eventually pop out I cried for a few seconds max and fell back asleep. I literally slept so much as a baby my parents had to nudge me awake for feeding and whatnot. Story 15. Finally a thread for me. I waited years and years for the perfect time, 11:11 and 11 seconds on November 11th, 2011. That's 111111111111. I was gonna make a wish, but I slept, my biggest life regret. Story 16. I overslept my surprise birthday party. Friends tried to downplay my birthday and just said something like come over around 7 and we'll just sit around and have some beers. I turned my phone off and took a nap beforehand and didn't set an alarm because I figured if it's just a few buddies hanging out and drinking, and I oversleep, it won't be a big deal. It was a big deal because I was an hour and a half late, and there were about 50 people at the surprise party, half of them left before I even got there. Phone was off, so they couldn't even call to wake me up. Story 17. Not me but a person I know. He had his final exam to become a lawyer. His girlfriend, later wife, went to church and prayed for 3 hours straight. He could not handle the pressure and went to the pub and got drunk. When his girlfriend found out, she ripped the out him. The result, he had to do the course again and delayed him becoming a lawyer by 6 months. Story 18. I had once applied to be a 911 operator in the county I was living in. Prior to being hired, during the pre-screening interview process, you have to submit to a polygraph exam at the local sheriff's department, FBI office, or state-level bureau of investigation. I live in Georgia, so I had to go to the GBI office near Atlanta. My poly was supposed to have been at 2:30 p.m. You have to be there early or on time, to the minute, otherwise the examiner will leave, and you won't get the poly. I took a short nap that afternoon, intending to wake up at 1 p.m. MapQuest told me it would take 30 minutes to get there from where I lived, but knowing traffic in the Atlanta area, I wanted to give myself extra time. I woke up at 2 o'clock p.m., drove to the GBI headquarters, and got there at 2:35 p.m. Needless to say, I didn't make it on time, and ended up not getting the job. Story 19. I slept through the first 4-ish hours of a 12-hour shift a couple of times. Granted, this was shortly after I got started working night shift, so my sleep patterns were all kinds of up, but it still wasn't fun to have to explain to my boss. He was super cool about it though. Story 20. I had to work Christmas Eve one year, so I bought a plane ticket for early Christmas morning to fly home to be with my family. They mailed me a single present so I'd have something to open when I woke up Christmas morning. When I got home from work, I looked at that present. I said to myself, Mom and Dad always let me open one present on Christmas Eve. I could just open it now, but then I decided to wait, went to bed, I overslept, woke up about 20 minutes before my flight was supposed to board, and I lived 45 minutes away from the airport. I called a cab to come get me and was sitting around waiting on it and figured, well, I guess I'll open that present now since I can't do anything else to get to the airport faster. It was an alarm clock, a CD player alarm clock, on the day I overslept. An alarm clock I almost opened the night before, and absolutely would have set as a backup alarm. Got to the airport, sat around for about 6 hours, realized I wasn't getting on a flight, took Metro to the bus station, got on a Greyhound bus for the 17-hour overnight bus ride home, got home at 9 in the morning on December 26th, so yeah. Missed Christmas entirely. TLDR, open your Christmas presents early, kids. Story 21. My mum shook me awake at 7:45 a.m. and told me your driving instructor's here. Took me a second to realize that it was because my 4th driving test was 8 a.m. on Tuesday, not Thursday. One of the rare times me saying SHIT didn't bother her. In about 5 minutes I had my clothes on, my contact lenses in, and was running out the door. My instructor took me to the test center where I found out I had the South African examiner that failed me on my 1st and 3rd tests. I passed. Story 22. Not technically overslept, but sort of. I missed my final university exam because I copied down the date wrong and only realized my mistake after the exam had started on the day, so I failed that one. Story 23. I ended up sleeping through the first day of my job, and yes, I wasn't allowed back and had to get a new job. But then again, at the time, I was struggling with a sleep disorder. Story 24. My mom once offered to take me on a week-long vacation to the beach. All I had to do was show up and ride with them. By the time I woke up they had assumed I decided not to go and were halfway there. Story 25. My final exam for Photoshop class during college. I arrived with 15 minutes left. My teacher was so disappointed as I was actually doing really well in that class. She agreed to let me write it, do the practical, but could only do so in the amount of time it took the one and only person in the room left to write it. I finished before him. Story 26. I overslept a final exam my first semester of freshman year. It wouldn't be a big deal, except it was my intro to criminal justice class for my major and my advisor was the professor. I wrote down the wrong time and was late by 2 hours, ran to her office and begged her to let me take it. She ended up giving me 20 minutes to take a 1.5-hour exam, but I finished it and all ended well. Story 27. Slept through 2 finals, both AM classes on the same day. Ended up getting a B in the class I had the highest grade and kicking myself in the leg for that one, and in the other class I got a B as well because I literally tracked the teacher down at his other job to take the test. I got lucky on that one. Story 28. A college history final. Didn't actually sleep through the whole thing. I woke up, went to lunch with my girlfriend and had an epiphany somewhere between mozzarella sticks and a chicken wrap that my history final had ended 5 minutes ago. Story 29. Well, technically I didn't oversleep cause I was working nights. Didn't get up till 3:30 p.m. 10:30 a.m. New York time. So YUP, I slept through the September 11th attacks. Story 30. Had placement internship for uni and a meeting with a placement supervisor from uni later that day. I went to sleep the night before feeling a bit off. I woke up the next day at 1:10 p.m. sick as a dog in 10 minutes after the meeting was supposed to take place. I was so sick I couldn't even get out of bed. I was sick for 2 solid weeks. I later got kicked out of that placement for an unrelated reason that wasn't my fault, but this was one of the reasons they gave along with a few other nitpicked stuff. Story 31. I had a take-home exam for the last class I needed to graduate. I waited until the last night to do it, but accidentally got too stoned and fell asleep. I woke up at 11:40 and the exam was due at midnight. It was an essay exam, so I didn't finish until well after midnight. I sent the professor an email begging him to take it for any credit, and he gave me 100. I got an A in the class and am graduating this December. It was probably the dumbest I've ever done since he could have failed me and set back my graduation another semester. Story 32. I overslept for one of my final exams for a calculus course. Came in 15 minutes late, but luckily I had enough time and did reasonably well. That sprint to class though, man was I out of breath. Story 33. I once answered a phone call at 7 a.m., which was for a job interview 8 a.m. in their time zone. I had just got off a night shift. In my disoriented condition, I decided that proceeding with a phone interview was a good idea. It wasn't. Story 34. I spent the summer working in a tourist resort in Greece. So many Brit tourists and workers missed their flights home because they got drunk the night before. Back then there was no Skyscanner to book another next-minute flight either, haha. Story 35. Was 20 minutes late for my first college class. I am a morning person, usually in bed by 10 p.m. and up by 5:30 a.m. College was kind of a shock for me. My first weekend there, friends were out until 4:30 a.m. at the bars and then going to be until the sun came up. I powered through my first weekend like that, and come Monday, I was exhausted. I tried to get some sleep and then I took a nap to get a little more. Woke up 15 minutes after the class started and then ran halfway across class. I was embarrassed as. Story 36. My own show. We sold out and I was one of 4 comics. I missed out on a good amount of and will definitely not be working that club again in the future. Story 37. My mum and her husband were doing it the night before and it got awkwardly loud that I couldn't sleep properly. Missed my alarm for my date. Ended up taking the wrong bus and had to take the train back in a new city. I somehow made it to the meeting place, but the restaurant that I wanted to go together was closed on a Sunday thanks Australia. He was pretty understanding about it, and surprisingly we haven't gone to that restaurant since then. We're nearly 3 years together. Story 38. My shift at a coffee shop. I used to work hours that were all over the place when I was at a coffee shop. Sometimes 4 a.m., sometimes 8:30 a.m., sometimes 11 a.m., 3 p.m., 6 p.m. It could be a short 4-hour shift or a double shift. Worst of all, it could be the dreaded clope and work the shift that closes the store, then come back in a few hours and start the shift that opens the store. Needless to say, my sleep schedule was all over the map and I frequently lost track of the day. One time, I took a nap in the middle of the day. When I woke up, I saw that the time was 3:30 p.m. I missed my 2 p.m. shift. They're going to kill me. I hopped on my bike, raced to the store, barged in apologizing profusely. The supervisor, amused, says, "You were just here this morning. You worked the 4 a.m. to 9 a.m. Remember, I was so disoriented from my chaotic sleep schedule that I forgot I had already worked that day." A job interview that was going to allow me to relocate with a huge pay increase. Didn't get the job because they couldn't expect me to be punctual. I am that person that is 10 to 20 minutes early to everything. Story 39. Back in the 90s, I was in New York City to run the marathon. I'm from Trinidad and I was crashing with an acquaintance the night before. He messed up when setting an alarm clock for me. This was before the days of alarms on cell phones and I overslept, missing most of the race. Story 40. My husband and I are from a small town in the south and had traveled to California for a football game in Berkeley. We were exhausted and hopped on the subway to head home. We both ended up falling asleep and woke up when the train stopped, at the end of the line, in Compton. Yeah, the scary one you hear about in rap songs, that Compton. This was about 10 years ago, before cell phones all had GPS, before Uber and the like. The train was done for the night and we were 2 young white kids, totally stuck. We rode the city bus to another subway station where we stood alone in the dark. Our guardian angel showed up in the form of an overweight black man with a turban on his head. He saw us alone at 2:00 a.m., scared to death, and took us under his wing. He approached us in a way that we trusted him and he escorted us to where we needed to be. He ended up taking us through 2 train switches just to get us on track to where we were going. He sat with us, and even waved off a very intimidating man who approached us at one point. When we finally made it to our stop and exited the train, he was nowhere in sight and nowhere to be found. I met my guardian angel in Compton, California that night. Story 41. Slept in late, started playing Sims 2 for a couple hours, realized at some point, oh yeah, my graduation is today, it's happening right now, better get my sim to the washroom. Story 42. Obligatory. Not me, but a guy I went to high school with raged at a party, passed out, and had about 3 dozen dicks drawn all over his face. He woke up the next morning shouting that he was late for his dad's wedding as he rushed out the door. Story 43. TLDR. Took LSD while drunk and nearly missed a midterm. Didn't actually miss the test but thought I would share. While in college I made my way to a buddy's apartment after a huge Halloween party. Being absolutely smashed and finding said friend ingesting large quantities of LSD, I decided that it would be a fantastic idea to imbibe myself. A short while later I realize I have a huge test, think it was a midterm in the morning and need to get some sleep. I go to lay down and as soon as I close my eyes it hits me. and I am on a roller coaster of light for the next 4 to 5 hours while in and out of consciousness. I wake up in the morning with a grass skirt and a coconut bra on, hungover as and still feeling the after effects of the LSD. 10 minutes before the test is supposed to start. Buddy is still tripping, but when isn't he, so he drives me to the school. I sprint into the lecture hall about 15 minutes late, wearing a pair of tiny shorts which were under the grass skirt and a baggy hoodie with no shirt underneath, having just thrown up on the way and looking like absolute death. Needless to say, the professor was not impressed but still let me take the test, which I limped through and actually did rather well on. All in all 810 would do it again. Story 44. I have a job interview tomorrow. I played football in college. I one time partied too much on Friday and slept through the first quarter. I was like fourth string so it was fine, but still paid for it. Story 45. Work for the second time in a month. Rigging crew on a major network show 3 years ago. Most important, oversleep, because that's the day I surrendered, and got clean and sober. Boss was luckily a co-worker friend of 10 years, and gave me a few days off, and a job to come back to. Story 46. I'm pretty good about time, but one day while staying at my now ex's house I overslept by about 3 hours, making me about an hour late for work. Problem was she also lived about an hour away from where I worked. Good news was that my boss, knowing that I was early literally every day, knew that if I was calling him to tell him I overslept and was sorry and would be there as soon as I could, was really chill about it and didn't give me any. Story 47. Had a 4-hour train to Sunderland at 6 a.m. so I could catch my team Fulham play against them. Ended up getting very drunk the night before on a night out and tried to do an all-nighter so I could catch the train. Ended up sleeping and missing the train, so had to shell out for $50 for a new train ticket. The game was the most boring 0-0 you could ever imagine. Think the lesson was that I should have stayed in bed after all. Story 48. When I first arrived at university my sleep patterns went out the window. I'd stay awake for longer than 24-hour periods and then sleep for stupid amounts regularly. Wake at 5 a.m. or p.m. depending basically on my mood. Anyway, when the Christmas holidays came around, I agreed to meet my parents at 5 p.m. to be picked up to go home. Went to sleep at midnight to make sure I'd wake up early and not miss it. Slept 16 hours straight. I did not make the scheduled meeting. Police were nearly called. Story 49. My English exam was late by 20 minutes. Mom freaked out since if you're not present they call her. My phone was almost dead so I didn't answer her calls or texts. Made it before the doors closed. And still got a 70. Story 50. Probably turning in a final paper. I had been awake 92 straight hours and finished the paper at 7:30 a.m. with 2 hours to spare. Knowing I wouldn't be able to wake up from a nap, I did my best to stay awake until the class. My roommate found me unconscious 3 hours later, sprawled out on the floor in my boxers with wide open bloodshot eyes. He later told me that he had thought I was dead when he found me. I somehow managed to turn it in without any penalty, so everything worked out. Story 51. After a suicide attempt I was referred to a Dr. Handley who decided that we should discuss why my sleep patterns were so disturbed and set up a follow-up appointment to look into treatment options to regulate my sleep better. Supposedly that would improve my mood. Anyway, I slept through that follow-up appointment. Story 52. My mom's death. She had a medication mix-up and accidentally overdosed on her prescription. I found her in the kitchen after school and called an ambulance. The hospital gave her something to counteract what she took, then sent her home and said to keep her awake for 24 hours. We sent my little brother to stay with a family friend for the night. Then her boyfriend and I took turns staying up with her the night. At some point, he fell asleep while sitting with her, and I slept through my alarm to take my turn. I woke up the next morning to him screaming my name and my mom having passed away. As an unexpected side effect to all of this, I find it almost impossible to sleep at night. Not sure if that's considered ironic. Story 53. I tried to pull an all-nighter and ended up sleeping through my Calc 2 final. I woke up in the middle of the exam, sprinted into the lecture hall in my pajamas and ran past 300 classmates crying, begging the teacher to let me take the final. Thankfully, I attended office hours all semester, so the professor knew me and let me make up the exam the next day. Edit typo. Story 54. My story doesn't fit exactly as I didn't oversleep, but I'd say it's still relevant, especially because my professor probably assumed I overslept. Sophomore spring in college, I was taking a computer science class and had a final on the last day of finals. The final is at 12:15, so I get up around 9 and go to a cafe on campus to get a bagel and look over everything. In there studying until a little past 11 when I realize I should make sure the final in the usual classroom, and go to the class page online. I see that while the final is in our usual auditorium, the final was actually from 9151215. I sprint up campus and run into the room 2 hours late to take the final. I was late to my final because I was studying for the final and wrote the wrong time down in my notebook. I remember combing through the final basically looking for the easier questions, the ones I knew how to answer for sure, and just did as many of those as I could. I don't think I ever got the grade for the test, but I got a B in the class. I honestly can't think of a thing I overslept. When I was a kid, my dad said I used to wake up around 6 and just be singing. One year my grandma got all the grandkids a radio alarm clock for Christmas. After that my parents made a rule that I was not allowed to leave my room for 7 a.m. Even as an adult, I typically wake up about 1.5 to 2 hours before I leave the house most mornings. I'm a guy with a shaved head, so there's not a lot prepping going on, so even when I wake up late it just means I have 45 minutes instead of 1.5 hours before I have to leave. Story 55. Slept through a high school bio exam my senior year before graduating. Luckily I was somewhat friends with the teacher, so I showed up with around 25 minutes left and he let me stay a little afterwards to at least finish part of it. Ended up with a C but graduated still. Story 56. I got to a final exam 30 minutes late. Fortunately, it was a very easy exam and I finished well before time was up. The best part though, is that I woke up on time. I thought it was a different weekday, so I figured I could snooze for an extra half hour. I didn't realize I was late until I was walking to the classroom. Story 57. A few years back, a good friend of mine was an overnight shelf stalker at a local grocery store. He asked me if I could pick him up at 6 a.m. when he got off. I said sure and set my alarm for 5 a.m. I ended up waking up at like 12 p.m. that day and had about 40 missed calls from him. Story 58. A job interview, which is probably a common answer. Missed my train and had to take a cab, so I was about 10 minutes late. What's funny is that after getting the job, on my first day to work, there were issues at the train station and I was late again. That was the last time for quite a while, and it was worth the effort and the cab fare. Story 59. University exams. I used to work at nights and during the mornings, and missed almost 40 of classes. Eventually I was not fully aware of details like dates and rooms of exams. One exam I completely missed because I didn't know it would be that day. I had a good rep with that teacher. We were two metalheads and he was pretty chill, so he asked me if next Wednesday would be alright for me. One exam I missed the hour, which was 1 hour before I thought. I arrived about 5 to 10 minutes before my time and stood alone waiting at the door and found it strange nobody was coming. No colleagues or the teacher. When I started thinking maybe it was moved to another room, I started panicking. That's when the professor left the room to get some water. WTF are you doing at the door? I entered and started the exam with about 75 minutes delay. As I already had professional experience, that was my advantage. And don't mean to brag, but I ended being the first to finish the exam to everyone's surprise and be among the 20 positive marks. It was one of the 2 exams for the degrees final class. Story 60. Flight from Wrocław to Warsaw. Thankfully, I was able to catch a later flight and still make my connector to Chicago, but just barely. Hey race, why getting super drunk the night before flying is ill-advised. Wrocław to Warsaw is like a 40-minute flight, so it's a tiny plane. I was super hungover, terrified of flying, and we had big turbulence on our tiny plane, so I puked everywhere. Most of it got in the bag though some got on my dress. Thankfully, the old lady next to me knew enough English to say it's okay, but I still felt just terrible for her. We land in Warsaw. I have a knee brace and a cane at the time, so I'm not moving super quickly, and my dress still has a modicum of puke on it. I go to check in for the Chicago flight, and the guy at the check-in desk gets wide-eyed and says we'll have to make a run for it. So we did, chubby Lufthansa worker and girl in pukey dress with cane. I go to the front of the line for security and we limp run across the terminal. They're shutting the door as we arrive. There is a very rushed, heated conversation in Polish. I don't speak Polish, so all I can think is, dear God, please let me go home. I know MA, but I just want to go home. Well, he must heard my prayers because they let me on the plane, and when I arrived in Chicago after a month in Russia and 2 weeks in Poland, I was so happy I cried. I had a couple hours before the flight to Detroit, so I sat at the bar in Bennigan's in my pukey dress that I'd been wearing for about 10 or 11 hours and had an American Coke. And it was fabulous. TLDR Emma for getting wasted the night before an international flight in a country where I don't speak the language. Story 61. I grew up in an isolated rural part of an otherwise suburban county. My bus ride to high school was 90 minutes each way, so Idaho typically spend the time doing homework or sleeping. I'd slide down in the seat, wedge my knees up against the seat in front, pull my hoodie up, and let the gravel roads rock me to sleep. Of course, when this happened, the bus driver couldn't see me. One time I fell asleep, and he must not have hit the pothole that normally shook me awake. He didn't realize I was still on, so he headed home for the day. It wasn't until he pulled into his driveway and shut off the bus that I woke up. He lived 45 minutes away from me. Longest, quietest ride of my life. Story 62. I got kicked out of my university study because I overslept my very last resit. If I'd been there, I'd probably have passed since I studied so much. Instead I wasn't, failed the class, and ended up not having enough credit to be allowed to continue. I ended up enjoying my new field of study more, but still. Story 63. Final exam. I didn't do well in the class, and the exam would have been the thing that allowed me to pass, or caused me to fail. I studied my off for it and felt really prepared, confident I would have aced it and passed the course. Then my alarm never went off. That was the third time the alarm failed to go off. The other 2 incidents were less important. I office spaced the out of that alarm clock afterwards, which was a bummer because it was the only alarm clock I'd ever seen that actually lets you go forwards and backwards to set the time, instead of having to press the minute button 59 times if you go ahead too far. Great concept execution. Story 64. A midterm exam. It was my 8 a.m. geology class and I was sure the test was on Friday, not Wednesday. I knew I'd be reviewing on Wednesday and I woke up feeling awful, like woke up in the middle of a REM cycle awful, decided to get some sleep so I'd be sharper to study later. Got up a few hours later, pulled out syllabus, and lo and behold the test was Wednesday. That morning, first thing I did was put on an old t-shirt, spill some Gatorade down the front, and call the campus medical center for an appointment. Luckily, a stomach bug had been going around. I went in, told them I spent the morning vomiting and spewing liquid, got a pass to make up the exam. I felt so guilty lying, but ID up big time and needed to save my skin. Story 65. It was the most exciting day in my entire degree. I was studying veterinary, I had a final exam, and after that I would start my first day working at the veterinary hospital to do an internship. Not only I overslept and missed the exam. I woke up 5h late and I arrived to the hospital when the introduction to the internship was coming to an end. My teacher thought for a while I was someone who didn't give about my studies. Story 66. Helping a good friend move house. Which on its own, doesn't sound too bad. The fact that ID arranged the movers and my friend doesn't speak the language is what made this important. I went out of partying with a couple of newcomers the night before. I got in at 6 a.m. truly believing I'd be able to get up for the 9 a.m. appointment. Story 67. About 4 months ago I got falsely accused for selling alcohol to a minor. Got sent home and told to stay home over the weekend. Spent the whole weekend being stressed out over it. Couldn't eat or sleep. Sunday comes along and I get a text from my boss telling me to come to work on Monday so we can sort things out. Don't get any sleep that night either. 2 hours before the meeting I get into the shower in order to freshen up. I get dressed, check the time and see there is an hour left until I have to leave. My body is aching due to malnutrition and the lack of sleep, so I decide to take a seat in my sofa while I wait. Bad idea. I wake up at 8 in the evening. 12 hours late to the meeting. Been unemployed ever since. Haven't been able to pay my bills. Can't find a new job. Social Security barely helps. The union won't pay me anything since I didn't bother with the meeting. Not family to turn to. You'll probably be homeless by the end of the month.